Jennifer Egan is here. She was just 26 when her first story was published in The New Yorker. Her first novel, The Invisible Circus, was a critical and popular success. Her most recent work, Look at Me, secured her a National Book Award nomination for fiction. The New Yorker described it as, quote, a stunningly written exploration of the American obsession with self-invention. I am pleased to have Jennifer Egan at this table for the very first time. Welcome.
Thank you.
This is getting a lot of very, 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 very good attention. And I wouldn't ask something silly like, are you surprised? But the level of it.
I'm surprised because it was published at what turned out to be such a bad time. I mean, It came out a week after September 11th, and things looked pretty grim at first. So I had basically resigned myself to the fact that, you know, the book I spent 6 years writing might never really get much attention at all. So it was a strange turnaround in mid-publication, and I owe it almost completely to the National Book Award nomination. So
all of a sudden, there was
it gave the book some kind of
look
life.
Again.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, I think a lot of writers have really struggled this fall because it was just hard to get any kind of media attention, and this gave me a way to get the book out there. So I am surprised because, you know, it was in midstream things really changed, and that was pretty thrilling.
When did you decide you wanted to write fiction?
I think I decided consciously when I was about 18. I mean, looking back, I can find the seeds of it much earlier, but I was obsessed with this idea of becoming an archaeologist for a long time, and it wasn't until I took a year off between high school and college and actually went on a small archaeological dig in Campsville, Illinois, which I paid to go on, that I realized that my notions of archaeology were unrealistic. I mean, I'd pictured digging out big urns and, you know, having this fairly glamorous international existence, and in fact, I was sitting on a square meter of earth with a scalpel in 99-degree heat, and I thought, I don't know, this isn't quite what I imagined. So I think after that, I actually did other things. I traveled by myself in Europe, and I think being separate from everything I knew really at such a young age forced me to look at what really mattered to me, and I realized that fiction was really what held the world together for me, writing fiction. And so I got to college knowing exactly what I wanted to do. Unfortunately, I had picked my college based on its archaeology program, and I was enrolled in that. So, you know, it made for a few logistical problems, but it was no big deal. And
so you added up on literature courses and things like that, or not?
Yes, very much so. Yeah, I mean, but I was very eclectic. I mean, I was an undergraduate, and I went in all different areas, and I did do actually some fiction writing. One story in my short story collection, Emerald City, is a much edited version of something I wrote in college.
Which was about what?
It's called Letter to Josephine, and it's about a woman who goes with her husband to Bora Bora in Tahiti and becomes fixated on this other younger woman whose life she begins to have all kinds of fantasies about, and then later sees that woman, whom she had imagined as very glamorous and sort of exotic, sees her working basically as a waitress. So it was very much about the way that fantasy life can kind of take over in liminal circumstances, or at times when we're removed from the ordinary rules of life, and travel is one of those times.
The first magazine article was about what?
You mean the article for the New York Times Magazine?
Right. Yeah, it was the New Yorker or the New York Times Magazine?
Oh, no. Okay, you meant the first short story I published was, yes, in the New Yorker when I was 26, and that was called The Stylist, and it took place in Africa on the island of Lamu. And it was
coming out of your travels?
To some degree, I had been there, yes. I mean, very briefly. But it was about a fashion shoot taking place there, and about a relationship between a stylist and a photographer.
And then the New York Times Magazine article was what?
The first New York Times Magazine article, oddly enough, also involved the fashion industry. Probably the only two things I've written up until this book that involved that. And that was about a young model named James King, who was 16 at the time that I wrote the story, and she's now an actress. She was in Pearl Harbor and other films. But I was really looking at the phenomenon of young girls living as adults, sometimes with 1 or even no years of high school under their belt in New York, working as fashion models. And I was looking at
what that life is about and what it does to you.
And that particular cultural moment of 1996, when, to a degree that I think has lessened now, the world, at least within America, the popular culture was very interested in and concerned with the modeling industry. And so the Times was interested in capturing that moment culturally, and that's what I tried to do.
The Invisible Circus?
The Invisible Circus is totally different. It's about, it takes place in the 70s, and it's about a girl named Phoebe O'Connor who is 18 and whose older sister has committed suicide at the end of the 60s. and she's haunted by that era and some sense of having missed this important time and being dwarfed by her sister's life. And so she ends up essentially running away from home with a bunch of postcards her sister had been sending from Europe and following in her steps, trying to figure out what happened to her. In fact, the itinerary she follows is my own itinerary from those travels I took during my year off when I was in Europe.
This book, what came first for you? The idea of a model who is reaching some years, and this relationship with a younger woman in her hometown, or was it the character? Was it the idea of the relationship? What?
I think I had an interest in exploring image culture and certain tensions and pressures that I saw at work in America. So that was the very abstract idea. For some reason, what I always begin with when I'm writing fiction is a sense of place. And that really predates characters, storyline, anything else. And the place in this case was Rockford, Illinois, strangely enough. But not really strangely, because my mother's from there, and I had been going there since I was a child, and I became fascinated by certain memories I had of it, not really personal memories, but more a sense of industrial decline that really permeates that. It's you know, it's a kind of classic smaller American city that has really struggled since industry began moving overseas. And so after my grandparents had both passed away, I found myself longing to go back there for reasons I couldn't understand, and my mother really couldn't understand. But I would go and
just to visit and to soak up the culture.
To soak up the culture, such as it is.
Yeah.
I mean, it's you know, it's a very American city in the sense that the downtown is very anemic. I mean, very little exists at this point, and commerce has moved out to malls, you know, in the middle of cornfields, and there's a lack of a center. But that's precisely what interested me. So yeah, I would rent a car and kind of drive around and lie around in my motel at night watching Unsolved Mysteries, which actually figures in the book to some degree, that TV show.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but here the idea of starting with place is interesting. I think my memory fades on this, but I think someone like, maybe him, John Updike said, I always start with place.
Oh, that's interesting.
You know, but someone else has told me that, because I would assume that novelist would start with a story, or a character would be the thing that motivates them to tell a story about, you know, but place, and in your case also an idea to explore a theme.
Mm-hmm. Well, that is always, that can't be too much in the foreground, because then why not just write an essay?
Right,
I mean,
exactly.
But there are certain intellectual or philosophical queries that I have playing around in my mind as a kind of background noise, and then meanwhile, I have something very different, which is this strong kind of almost a gut feeling of an atmosphere or a place where I want to be mentally. That doesn't mean it's a place where I want to be physically necessarily. Yeah. And in the case of Rockford, again, you know, it's not that it's some kind of fascinating place necessarily, except for what it represents and the ways in which, I guess, in my mind, that it dovetailed with certain of the intellectual queries that I had. But in any case, as I was driving around there, then characters began to come to me, and I would say that's the next step for me, is that I have a sense of people, and I really need to hear them. I need to have a sense of how they would speak before I really feel that they exist enough for me to write about them.
Stimulated by somebody you meet, or?
No, not at all. In fact, the further from my own experience the characters seem to be, the better. I'm very bad, and in fact would like to improve, at being able to write about people I know, or even my own life, which I write about very poorly. So I need to feel that there's almost no overlap between my fictional world and my actual life.
How did you know you write about your own life poorly?
Bitter experience. No, I mean, I'm really, the personal essay, the memoir, all these forms that are so popular
now.
But
you don't put things into your fiction that happened to you in a way that it gives you a chance to
a little bit,
be cathartic,
a little
or
bit.
something.
No, I do. For example, in the case of that story I mentioned, Letter to Josephine, that short story that I wrote in college, I myself had an experience of seeing someone that I had all kinds of glamorous imaginings about, and then later, you know, years later, a couple of years later, encountered her working as a waitress, which was quite strange. So yes, I do take personal incidents and put them in, but really important aspects of my life do not find their way in, except in a kind of coded form that I can't even crack, because the truth is, if I feel that I'm writing about myself, it doesn't interest me. And you mentioned believing that writers must begin with the story, and I can see why you would think that. I mean, I tend to think that too, except that if I know the story, I'm not interested in writing it, because for me, the process is really one of discovery. And so the feeling of writing is not that dissimilar.
So you have no idea where, when you started writing this, and once you discovered at least some of your characters, and you knew the locale, Rockford in New York, you had no idea what was going to unfold.
I had some vague idea. I mean, I think it's a little bit like driving. I can see what's ahead of me on the road, but that's very little of the ultimate destination.
Or you know what direction you're going, but you know which road you're going to take.
Exactly. I mean, I think if I can see my way. I mean, when people tell me they read the last page of a book first, I can't even imagine doing that. I mean, I'm very childlike in the sense that whether I'm reading King Lear or Agatha Christie, which I loved as a kid, not knowing the end is crucial for me as a reader and as a writer to some degree also. But interestingly, what I do begin to have a sense of as I move through the narrative is where the ending will occur. Again, place is the beginning. In the case of Look at Me, it was a pretty scary feeling not to know where the story would go, because it's a very complicated story with many strands.
With lots of characters. I want to talk about a few of them. What character came to you first?
I think probably the model,
Charlotte.
oddly enough, yes, who has this catastrophic car accident and whose face is essentially destroyed.
A person who's made her life as
selling her image.
Her image.
She's a sort of middling fashion model.
And she comes back to New York and nobody really.
Exactly. But she came out of Rockford in the sense that I was driving to Rockford in one of these rented cars in a huge rainstorm, and I suddenly had this notion of the car spinning off the road and someone destroying her face, and that was the linchpin of the story. I knew that she was from Rockford, and I had a sense that this was going to be about the confluence of these two worlds, Rockford and New York. And that she would be the person who was connected to both worlds. So once I had her, then other kind of murmurings that I had been having while in Rockford made more sense to me. I knew there was kind of a mad history professor who was obsessed with the Industrial Revolution.
Right.
I had a sense that there was some young ingenue in there. And I also knew right from the beginning that I had a chameleon character, someone who had taken on multiple identities and someone whose past we don't really know as the book is unfolding.
Right.
So they came to me sort of slowly.
But the principal character is the one that she has a kind of the relationship with, the young woman, would you say?
Yeah, you mean the younger girl?
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, and she came to me fairly early too. I mean, I knew that, as I say, that there was a young, sort of an ingenue, someone whose life wasn't clear to her yet, a teenager.
But she's very different from Charlotte.
Yes, she is quite different. And I had some sense that their contact would be glancing but meaningful, and that they would meet again at the end of the book. But again, I had no idea where or how.
Why are they attracted to each other?
Well, I think that in a certain sense, there's a certain kind of directness that they both have, in a way, an inability to dissemble effectively. So they have a sort of a chance encounter in which they both speak very frankly, and then part ways and both presume that they'll never see the other again. I mean, I think that that's really the thing they have in common, and then many things separate them also. They do have a connection in that the younger Charlotte is the daughter of the elder Charlotte's best friend from high school, we don't know, may have been named after her.
You also have a terrorist, Z. What after September 11th, what went through your mind? Now, two things. First of all, go ahead. Tell me
well,
about it.
I felt quite shocked by certain parallels between the man I had invented and some of the people who had perpetrated the bombings of September 11th. And what I found especially eerie was that, I mean, I had done a fair amount of research on my character and had spoken to some people who had worked in the FBI and counterterrorism, and had been led to believe that the classic suicide bomber profile was someone very young and inexperienced, without much to lose, kind of a simple zealot. And I knew that that was not going to work for me, that someone like that couldn't carry through the trajectory that I wanted my character to carry through. So I decided to depart from that in certain ways and make him a little bit older, better educated, someone who came to radicalism a little later in life. And so it was very eerie to find that some of these men departed from the model in the same way.
Exactly, you said it well. I mean, that's exactly what's surprising about these terrorists. They didn't fit the profile. You know, they were adult, had families, they were not 18-year-olds for the most part who seemed to have been lost and impressionable, and somebody could easily you know, take them on some journey,
Exactly.
promising them some return that they didn't
Sophisticated, in other words. Exactly. Yes. So that was very strange. It's not the first time that I've had that sense of you know,
being prescient.
reality, well, or even just reading things and then finding reality echoing them, not necessarily always, you know, being the source of the prescience.
Right.
I mean, I think the truth is that, you know, I was consciously trying to find the tensions and the pressures that I saw at work on America in the late 20th century and project out from those to imagine what the future would be like. I mean, the novel was intended to be slightly futuristic, although
Right.
it doesn't really, I don't think it will end up reading that way. And you know, I mean, I think terrorism was one of those pressures, and I think we all knew that in some sense, and so that's what I was writing about. I mean, in a way, there's no mystery about it. It's just the timing that's so strange to have the book come out right as that was happening.
You also reasonably prescient about reality-based entertainment.
That was another strange thing. I mean, again, you know, it's you know, to some degree, reality-based entertainment is not a new thing.
Right,
I mean, it's
exactly,
existed
right.
for quite a
Right.
while, and even recently, MTV's Real World has existed throughout the 90s.
But the phenomenal primetime success of things like Survivor.
That was definitely a shock, because I invent this internet service in which people basically allow their actual lives to be packaged for public consumption and for movie research and you know, all kinds of consumer activities, and I thought this was really satirical and kind of wild. In fact, I worried that it would be too far out. And so it was very strange to open up the newspaper one day and read that a show was coming to America about people being stranded on a desert island. I just thought, no, it can't be. So it was strange. But again, you know, I was listening carefully to the zeitgeist, very consciously, and clearly that was something that was coming along. I mean, what I often think is the lesson I've learned is if you're going to try to write about contemporary life, do it very quickly.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
it
Well, where
moves
do you
very
find
fast.
the zeitgeist?
Well, yeah,
I mean, just
think
absorbing it from newspapers, magazines, movies, what people are talking about?
I think just your gut. Yeah, I mean, it's not. I don't go about it in a journalistic way at all. It's just instinct. What seems interesting and relevant to me. You know, you hope that you're tapping into the zeitgeist, and that what you are imagining will feel relevant at the time that it's published.
You want people to come away from this, Look at Me, with some sense of an exploration of interesting characters, an entertained, a read that was satisfying, entertaining, took them on a journey that they were that opened their mind to new ideas, all of those things.
Sure.
What else? What is it that what's the most pleasant thing? What's the most satisfying thing that people have said who've read the book?
Oh, that's a great question. I think that, you know, I think there's always some hope of impacting the way people think. And I find that even in college, when I would be writing essays about, you know, the imagery in Paradise Lost, I would have a sense of urgency about it. You know, that this was really an important point, and it was going to really change things when the word got out there about this thesis of mine. So I think that's something that's in a way what makes writing so thrilling for me. There's a sense of urgency about it, a sense that somehow this really matters. You know, in the end, does it really? I don't know. But you know, I've had people say things that it had some impact on the way they saw celebrity culture, that it made them question certain things. I think that's, you know, that's always the hope, is that somehow the book ends up staying in people's minds, and that they think of it, you know, after. I mean, what you've talked about is wanting the read to be enjoyable, which
Sure.
of course is very important, and as a reader I value that very, very highly. But I think ideally, of course, you want it to leave people with something more, something that lasts, and
that makes them think, and makes
very
them,
much so.
and also in some way that touches their own experience, or somehow they think says something to them that they have grappled with, or in a sense, or surprises them in a way that it puts things in a different perspective.
Absolutely.
It brings some kind of light, either personally or outwardly, to one's life.
Absolutely. I mean, that's always the hope. You know, my mother once said I had written something, and she had said she had liked it, and I was disappointed. And she said, "Well, what is it that you want? What is the reaction that you want?
Right.
What would be enough for you?"
Go, Mom, go.
And I thought about it, and I said, I think I want to call from the emergency room where someone has had to be hospitalized because the impact of my work was so enormous. I mean, I'm being trivial, but you know, there's the hope that it will have some kind of effect on the way people think. Absolutely.
Is writing a book like this such an exhausting, demanding thing that you don't even think about what you want to do next until it's sort of out there and on the bookstores and you have promoted it and you can then at some point find breathing time and to recharge your batteries and look again?
I find that the next thing begins to kind of tingle in my mind as I'm finishing the prior thing, or one hopes that it will. Again, because what I start with is so vague. I mean, just a sense of atmosphere or a sense of place. It really is sort of faint. But I had a sense of this coming along in me as I was finishing The Invisible Circus, and I have a sense of the next thing now.
Well, where are you? Do you have a place?
I have a place, and that's about it.
Do you have one character?
I have a place and a sense of some characters, but it's you know, the way I write can be frustrating and a little bit scary because obviously I'm in control of this on some level, but the way I experience it is that I am waiting for things to reveal themselves to me. So I have a sense of this having to wait, and that can be frustrating.
What's the joy for you of writing? I mean, writing something you have to do, but what's the satisfaction?
I think the satisfaction is the sense of in some way fusing thought and feeling and emotion all at one time and creating a world that is so absorbing that it feels like it matters. I mean, that's just a thrilling feeling to create a world. To create that, exactly, and to feel that it's working, to feel that it matters is there's just no more thrilling feeling that I know. I mean, the converse, unfortunately, is that when it's not working, it's
agony.
Really a dreary feeling. I mean, it's hard to be cheered up in any way when years of work, which, you know, are what it takes me to write a novel, at times feel that they might be wasted or that I'm just going to fall short. I'm not going to pull things together in a way that will be satisfying and meaningful, and it's terrifying.
Jennifer Egan, Look at Me, National Book Award finalist. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. See you next time.